Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's program, Yahya, the head of Hamas in Gaza, issues a statement confirming the killing of the leader Yahya Sinwar by Israeli forces. Israel releases drone footage of the final moments of Yahya Sinwar's life just after he was killed yesterday in a military operation in Rafah. And the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the conflict with Hamas will continue unless the group puts down its weapons. And the US President Joe Biden says it's time to move on after the death of the Hamas leader, adding that he's more hopeful about the prospect of a ceasefire now. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. In a televised address, the head of Hamas, Yahya, has paid tribute to Yahya Sinwar, describing him as a fallen martyr. Well, the head of Hamas in Gaza went on to call Sinwar steadfast, brave and intrepid, stating that he sacrificed his life for the cause of our liberation.
We mourn the great leader, the martyred brother, Yahya Sinwar, Abu Ibrahim, Hamas political bureau chief and commander of the Al-Aqsa flood battle.
Well, this comes after Israel released a video from Israeli drone footage which shows the Hamas leader sitting in a bombed building before throwing a piece of wood at the drone. Well, after an Israeli operation in Rafah, which involved the storming of a building during routine searches for Hamas members, Sinwar was killed alongside two other men. Well, his body was later identified using DNA records, confirming his death in that raid. Well, Yahya Sinwar, who had long topped Israel's most wanted list, was considered a central figure in orchestrating the attacks that took place on the 7th of October. His role in coordinating Hamas's operations made him a critical target for Israeli forces. Well, despite this significant development, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has emphasized that Sinwar's death does not signal the conclusion of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Netanyahu reiterated that the conflict would persist until Hamas puts down its weapons.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
The Israeli Prime Minister speaking there. Well, the head of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya, has also emphasized during his address that captives held in Gaza will not be released until Israel ceases its attacks and withdraws its forces from the besieged enclave. Welcome. In a televised address, the head of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya, has paid tribute to Yahya Sinwar, describing him as, quote, a fallen martyr. Well, he went on to call Sinwar steadfast, brave and intrepid, stating that he'd sacrificed his life for, quote, the cause of our liberation.
We mourn the great leader, the martyred brother, Yahya Sinwar, Abu Ibrahim, Hamas political bureau chief and commander of the Al-Aqsa flood battle.
Well, this comes after Israel released a video from a drone which shows the Hamas leader sitting in a bombed building before throwing a piece of wood at the drone. Well, after an Israeli military operation in Rafah, which involved storming the building during a routine search for Hamas members, Sinwar was killed alongside two other men. Well, his body was later identified using DNA records, confirming his death in that raid. Well, Yahya Sinwar, who had long topped Israel's most wanted list, was considered a central figure in orchestrating the attacks that took place on the 7th of October. Well, his role in coordinating Hamas's operations made him a critical target for Israeli forces. Well, despite this significant development, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emphasized that Sinwar's death does not signal the conclusion of Israel's military campaign in Gaza. Netanyahu reiterated that the conflict would persist until Hamas puts down its weapons.
Well, this is not the end of the war in Gaza. It's the beginning of the end. To the people of Gaza, I have a simple message. This war can end tomorrow. It can end if Hamas lays down its arms and returns our hostages.
The Israeli Prime Minister speaking there. Well, the head of Hamas in Gaza, Khalil Hayya, also emphasized during his address that captives being held in Gaza will not be released until Israel ceases its attacks and withdraws its forces from the besieged enclave. Well, for more reaction to the news of Yahya Sinwar's killing, I'm joined now by the head of the Palestinian mission to Denmark, Ambassador Manuel Hassassian. Thank you for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Let me start by asking you, what went through your mind yesterday when the news was confirmed that Yahya Sinwar was dead?
Well, actually, we were expecting this. It's not something new, because they assassinated Haniyeh, they assassinated Hassan Nasrallah. We knew that they would target Yahya Sinwar. And it was not really a strange feeling for me, because I knew that they were pursuing to assassinate him for a year now. But it happened that, Yahya Sinwar was a fighter and he died at the battlefield. So it's not orchestrated by the logistics of intelligence in trying to get him. It was sheer coincidence. And Netanyahu now is reaping the benefits that he killed, the guy who orchestrated the 7th of October, and they got rid of a terrorist, as he claims, as if there is no other Sinwars will come back and will be joining, and life goes on, as we say.
From what you're saying, Yahya Sinwar was far from being irreplaceable.
Well, I can say that he was a military strategist. He knew the mindsets of the Israelis. As you know, he was in prison for almost 24 years. And the guy was a graduate of Islamic University. So you're not talking about an ordinary guy. A guy with talents, with intelligence, and he managed militarily, strategically, to resist Israel's occupation in Gaza as much as he could. But unfortunately, things happen. Look, this is the end of him. But this doesn't mean that Hamas is finished. This doesn't mean that the problem in Gaza is finished. And this doesn't mean that Sinwar is irreplaceable. No, he is replaceable.
But nevertheless, a serious blow to morale, I'd have thought, for not just the people of Gaza, the whole Hamas apparatus.
Yes, it was a blow, and I agree with you. As the death of Hassan Nasrallah was a blow to, to the Lebanese people in general, I would say. But in the final analysis, they do understand that, leaders are targeted for assassination. And Hezbollah, immediately they have a replacement. And they think that, they have to intensify, the resistance against Israel. And as you can see, that with the death of Nasrallah, we have seen Hezbollah to be more proactive, in terms of launching rockets to Israel. So things did not subside, and it did not really hit the morale, where Hezbollah gave up its arms, basically. And let alone, if you look at Hamas, it's the same story. They will continue their resistance, they will continue their fight. Their ideology is not going to be exterminated, by eliminating the militias of Hamas. Of course, Hamas also is getting severe blows from the Israelis, but this is life. This is resistance. We're not talking about state fighting another state. We're talking about non-state actors in politics, and these non-state actors in politics have taken, arms against their occupiers, and they think this is legitimate. And whoever joins them is a jihadist. And those who don't join them, basically, they are considered to be defeatist. So there is no a gray area here.
Right, and just, I'm aware that you never actually met Yahya Sinwar, but I wanted to ask you what sort of a reputation he had as a person amongst people you knew in the world of Palestinian politics and amongst the Palestinian people?
Well, actually, they look at him as a hero, as a daring person, intelligent. His heart is for Palestine. He was committed through his own ideology that, fighting and resisting occupation is something sacred. He was liked by the militants of Hamas because he was a military strategist with them. And in general, I think the population, I can't tell because there's no still, survey of public opinion. But of course, those fundamentalists, Islamic fundamentalists in Gaza, are of course pro-Sinwar, and they think they have lost a great leader.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about the legacy of Yahya Sinwar and how it's going to change now as a result of how he died, because it's very far removed from the picture that was painted of him by some in Israel who said that whilst young people were being killed on the battlefield, Hamas leadership like Yahya Sinwar were hiding in bunkers. And this turned out not to be the case at all. And I'm wondering whether, and I'm putting this question to other people that we speak to today in this program, has Israel inadvertently created something of a legend out of him?
I think so. I think so. They put the onus on Yahya Sinwar as being, the architect of October 7th attacks. And they believe that Yahya Sinwar understands the Jewish mentality very well, and he speaks Hebrew very well, and he could understand the mindsets of the Israelis. And that's why, as a character, he knew exactly how the Israelis think strategically and tactfully. And that's why, Netanyahu put the onus on Yahya Sinwar and made him also a leader, by shouldering him the responsibility of 7th of October and making him the archenemy of Israel.
Do you see some of what's being described by Western leaders, the President of the United States, the leaders of a number of European countries, this as being an opportunity for not just Gaza, but all the Palestinian people? Do you think the word opportunity is an appropriate word for us to be using at this stage?
The word opportunity is far from reality. We don't see it on the ground. We only listen to certain statements that come out from, presidents and what have you, because my perception that these are hollow words that have no concrete action on the ground. And if we look at opportunities, we don't know who is going to be after Sinwar, who is going to be the leader, who is to conduct the negotiations with the Israelis on the release of the hostages. We don't know. And now it's much more complicated because there is no negotiations and there's no leader from the other side, which is Hamas. And I don't see that window of opportunity unless we have someone who is flexible enough from Hamas to stop the war and to have humanitarian as a precondition to accepting to the release of the hostages. Without that, nothing is going to happen. So we have to wait and see. And let's not build our expectations too high by the killing of Sinwar, because things now are getting more serious. And I think it is chaotic now, because between the Hamas leaders inside and the Hamas leaders outside, that they need to have a replacement immediately on the battlefield. And that in itself will take some time for that person to go back to the issue of the hostages as a second priority, not as a first priority when it comes to him as a leader in Gaza.
And you wouldn't hold out much hope, therefore, that when you heard President Biden saying that his Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, would be going back to the region to talk diplomacy, you don't sound like you're particularly optimistic that, given that this isn't the great opportunity it's being described as, that he's going to achieve very much during that visit?
I don't think he will achieve much from that visit. And as long as Hamas is in shambles now, I would say, for the time being, and nothing is going to be done. And the only trump card that Hamas has is the hostages. Besides that, their stamina, their ammunition has been depleted, and more and more. So Hamas is in a state, I would say, of really recollecting itself and trying to put a new strategy of how to take this over. And besides the political faction within Hamas that will deal with the negotiations on the hostages. Maybe Blinken is meeting, what's his name? Netanyahu. And he's not, is he going to meet with Hamas? No, he's going to meet with Netanyahu. He's going to meet with the Egyptian leader, Sisi, president. I don't think he's coming to Ramallah to meet our President Abbas. So, what is the purpose of this visit? Is Israel willing to withdraw from Gaza and accept the release of hostages without putting conditions on Hamas and go back to October 6th? I think things will be easier. Now, it's a matter of Palestinian issue. How to conduct and try basically to work out the national reconstruction of Gaza. It has to be an internal issue between the Palestinian Authority and that of Hamas. And I think Hamas reached a point where it would like to be part of the PLO, which means that they will be under the umbrella of the Palestinian Liberation Organization that is headed by President Mahmoud Abbas. In other words, the salvation for Hamas to the process of being part and parcel of the PLO will help Hamas to stay, but they wouldn't have the power to re-control Gaza or to be in charge of Gaza on civil and other issues. So that's for, if something is going to happen, I think, Blinken should push in his process, President Abbas, to be part and parcel of reconstructing Gaza, because President Abbas represents Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. And then we talk about legitimacy, and then we talk about, the world community. We talk about international organizations being part and parcel of the national reconstruction and the infrastructure of Gaza, let alone some Arab countries will contribute, to the national reconstruction of Gaza. And that's the way we go further. And then we talk about legitimacy, and the legitimacy is President Abbas and the PLO.
Yes,
and
but does Hamas pay attention to the Palestinian authorities? Do you have lines of communication, and do you get the impression that there is a way to influence Hamas in a positive way? Is that something you think the Palestinian authorities can do? And if so, why are they not doing more of it?
We are doing as much as we can. Our president is trying, diligently to do that, and he has managed to reach a point where Hamas now wants to be part of the PLO, and that's the greatest achievement. Once they are part of the PLO, they are under the rubric of President Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO. Who did the negotiations with Israel in Oslo? It was the PLO. So the legitimacy of the PLO in controlling via the Palestinian Authority, Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem is a legitimate authority to continue with the issue of the two-state solution. If we don't do that, then what are we talking about? Where is peace? Where is security? Not only to Palestine, to the Middle East at large. The fulcrum of this today in the Middle East, the problem in the Middle East basically is the Palestinian-Israeli issue. Once we solve that, then the stability and security of the region will pave the way for a reconstruction, and elections will take place, within the presidential and that of the parliament, our parliament, the legislative council. And then we talk about a fresh new era. And the Israelis have to help us in conducting these elections because they are prohibiting us to using it in East Jerusalem. And that's why we didn't have elections for almost 15 years now.
Sure. I mean, speaking of elections, there is an election in the United States in just a couple of weeks from now. And what's certain is there are less than 3 months to go before the Biden administration is over and a new page is turned. Are you seeing any opportunities there? Because some people we speak to say that the end of presidential terms in the United States can actually be quite productive, in particular with regards to this issue, the Middle East peace issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, let me tell you something. I go back when Clinton, 6 months before, exiting the presidency, he tried to pull out Camp David. It was not well prepared on both sides. He just rushed it. He wanted to have, an agreement as an exit president in order to have this honor that he has achieved peace in the Middle East. The same story goes now to Biden. Look, Biden in the beginning, in the middle, in the end, he's still sending military arms basically to Israel to annihilate the Palestinian people, in Gaza. Now, because he's exiting, he wants to be the emblem of peace and security in the Middle East by stopping the war and having, humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians in Gaza. And so far, he could not influence Netanyahu to stop and have an armistice for at least a week for people, not to die from hunger and famine as they are doing now in Gaza. And the world is watching them dying from hunger and famine. And now, after this opportunity of the killing of Sinwar, now Biden and Kamala Harris, they want to straighten the records that they are for peace and stability and that they want to help the Palestinians while they are arming Israel up to its teeth. So this is the oxymoron of the situation. This is how I see the American policy. It is so sad that they have never been honest with their policies when it comes to Palestinians. And in the negotiations, they always supported the top dog, which is Israel, over the underdog, the Palestinians. And they have never changed their policy vis-a-vis the Palestinians. So why should we trust them now, during the 3 months, that they will really put action on Netanyahu to stop the war? I don't think Netanyahu will stop the war. After November 5, when he sees what the results are, he will reconsider the situation. That's how I see it. And I see that he likes to see Trump winning the elections because Trump unequivocally is on the side of Netanyahu. The others also were on the side of Netanyahu, but at least Trump will be straightforward to tell the Arab in Michigan, the citizens and the Arab world, that Israel is a country, has to survive. And as he said, it's a little tiny country, they want to take it, the Arabs and the Palestinians. It's a tiny country. Why don't they leave it for Israel and let the Arabs leave the Palestinians to live in Arab countries? This is a president who is running for elections, and he's saying this. So by de facto, what impressions the Palestinian Authority will have if this guy wins the elections, let alone the Palestinian citizen in America, when they hear such statements, will they vote for him? I guess not.
Ambassador, we're coming to the end of this interview. I just want to put one last thought to you. And let's sort of try to be a bit more optimistic about what can be done in the immediate future to bring about some sort of a solution here. Why doesn't the Palestinian authorities try to broker, and maybe you can tell me this has already been happening, broker a hostage release deal with the very clear message that returning the hostages who've been held under appalling conditions for more than a year now in Gaza, they go back to Israel, and the suffering for the Palestinian people in Gaza comes to an end. Food and supplies are returned, the reconstruction process begins. That somehow package that up into an offer that is impossible to refuse. Isn't that a role that the Palestinian authorities can play as brokers in chief?
Well, actually, the Palestinian Authority has been since day one. I mean, our president, the Foreign Office in Palestine, have been, diligently working with the international community on bilateral relations and international organizations to stop this carnage of war, this onslaught on the Palestinians in Gaza, and have humanitarian assistance and put pressure on Israel to stop the war. Once the war is stopped, there would be negotiations between the two parties, Hamas and that of Israel, to release the hostages. Hamas is willing to release the hostages, but not at any cost. The Israelis are putting impediments and conditions, and the war is continuing, and they are killing every day, and they want the release of the hostages without any return. How could this happen? Even our president, if he talks about it, he cannot broker such a deal, which the Israelis want, at the expense of being, the top dog, in this war. So it's not going to work out. Israel has to understand, in any negotiations, you put your maximalist position, but you end up with your optimum. And that optimum goes also to Hamas, where there will be an agreement with no expectations of achieving everything, but at least reaching a compromise. And that compromise would be the cessation of war, in return, the release of hostages.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Ambassador Manuel Hassassian, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by Yossi Beilin, who has held multiple ministerial and leadership positions in the Israeli government, amongst the Minister of Justice, Minister of the Economy, and Deputy Foreign Minister. Dr. Beilin, thank you very much for speaking to us. You, of course, played an important role in the peace process, notably with the Oslo Accords of 1993. Let me just start by asking you about the death of Yahya Sinwar. Does this represent, do you think, an opportunity for the page to be turned on what's been a year-long chapter of unspeakable horror in Gaza?
My clear answer is yes. When I initiated the Oslo process at the end of 92, my main reason for that was the increasing power of Hamas in the Palestinian state, in the Palestinian street. It was seen as much less corrupt than the PLO, intended to help the people, genuine, young, and people, even non-religious people, tended to support Hamas. I understood that this was a movement which totally negated any idea of peace with Israel, and just suggested to eradicate Israel, while the PLO, on the other hand, already recognized in '88, even if it is indirectly, the state of Israel and readiness to partition the land. And I think that Hamas remained a huge impediment on the way for peace. And if today, as a result of the killing the leader the other day, it is much weaker, I think that it is good news for those who believe in peace in the Middle East.
Sure. I mean, President Biden called Yahya Sinwar an insurmountable obstacle. And as we've been saying, that obstacle no longer exists. But let's be clear, he wasn't the only obstacle, was he?
Well, on all sides, there were mistakes, and there were people who were against peace, and there was violent and whatever. But he brought it to an extreme. I mean, what happened on October the 7th last year was impossible to describe. I mean, a human being cannot even apprehend the cruelty of his plan and the implementation of this plan. And his rejection of any peace agreement with Israel was total. On the other side, even if there were people who prefer not to have peace with the Palestinians, it is impossible to compare it to the behavior of Hamas. But it is true that he was not the only one. He was a very major one.
Lots of world leaders using this word opportunity, and that's the word that I started with as well when talking to you. We've heard that word used by the Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris in the United States, world leaders from Italy, France, Germany, the UK and the European Union using similar language. Do you think Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is feeling this international pressure to end the war in Gaza and realize this opportunity, or do you think he just disregards it?
Well, ending the war in Gaza is connected to the two-state solution because what has to happen is the total release of the hostages by Hamas, withdrawal of Israel from the Gaza Strip, and inviting through the PLO a group of Arab states to put a foot on the ground and to take upon itself the management of Gaza for an interim period, like a year or 2 years or something like that. But those Arab states will not come to Gaza if there is no political horizon. And the political horizon is negotiations on the two-state solution. Now, this is the point. I think that on the one hand, the Americans should try to convince the Arab side speaking about indirectly Hamas, to release all the hostages, and the Israeli side to agree to the solution which is accepted by the whole world. I believe personally that it should be under an umbrella of an Israeli-Palestinian confederation. But at the end of the day, it is two-state solution. And since Netanyahu himself supported even the Trump plan 4 years ago, there is no reason that he should be the one who rejects it. There are others on his government, and they may leave the government if he accepts it, but then he should be assured that the opposition will support him if he is losing his majority in order to get to the two-state solution.
It sounds like, listening to what Netanyahu has said in the last 24 hours, like he'd agree with a lot of what you just said, but he'd say, not yet. He said, this is not the end of the war, but the beginning of the end. It sounds like now, in his opinion, is not the right moment for peace, because there has been this momentum that Israel has been experiencing lately, in particular with regards to degrading hostile forces in the region like Hezbollah, now Hamas, and others as well. Do you agree with Netanyahu that the war should carry on? We shouldn't, the violence should not come to an end yet. It should carry on until such time as, all sides are ready, and that isn't right now.
It's long overdue. We never had such a long war. We shouldn't have such a long war. I don't understand exactly what was the reason why Netanyahu continued and dragged it until now, and still speaking about continuing it. I mean, the price that all of us in the region are paying for this is crazy. We should not do that. We should stop it or end it now. And if you speak about now is not the time, usually peace is signed by enemies. And I'm not saying that the Palestinian Authority is our enemy. It is our past enemy. And we are not going to make peace with Hamas because both sides are not ready for that. But the situation of war is usually leading people to say, okay, enough is enough, let's make peace. And the history is full of such examples. So, true, there is hatred even increased because of what happened in the last year. But strangely enough, the need for peace is bigger. And I believe that if you have leaders on both sides, and if you have third parties who might push for that, it is not just pie in the sky.
Yeah, I mean, quite a lot of people have told this channel, we've been speaking to them, interviewing them from Israel and other parts of the world, who've said to us that they believe Prime Minister Netanyahu wants the war to carry on for as long as possible because it's directly linked to his own political survival. And the minute the war stops, he will have to face the music in terms of various legal setbacks and issues that he faces. Do you buy into that?
You know, the fact that it made an ongoing war may, and I don't know how, play into his hands doesn't mean necessarily that he planned it so. I am not sure. I'm not sure that it is right. I'm not sure whether it is wrong. What I'm sure today is that we need a third party, something which we did not need in the Oslo years, but that was 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. Today, we need a third party. The third party is there. And if you speak about the UAE, if you're speaking about Egypt, if you're speaking about other Arab countries, and of course, the United States. And with them, we should move.
What about China?
I'm not sure whether they are there, and I'm not sure whether both parties see them as, I would say, impartial. But if they want it, you know, I went to China years ago and suggested to them to join the quartet with the UN, United States, EU, and Russia. And they said, no, we are not in a hurry to join something like that. And I'm not sure whether they changed their mind about it. Eventually, China is a very important country. And if it is ready to do something like this, I would not reject it up front.
I say China because China has been sharply critical of what's been happening in Gaza in recent weeks. They've expressed concern about the suffering of people there. Let me ask you this. Let's see the world through Benjamin Netanyahu's prism once again and try to work out what he needs to see in order to bring about an end to this war. What do you think he's waiting for? What do you think he wants to achieve before he's ready to sit down at a negotiating table and start talking about peace? Because we've had the death of Yahya Sinwar, the suffering of more than 1 million people in Gaza has been plain for everyone in the world to see. What else do you think Benjamin Netanyahu is waiting for?
I don't presume to know what are his thoughts. I know him quite well, many years. And still, I really don't know, by the way, if we are speaking about his trial, why does he really think, if he thinks so, that being a prime minister makes his situation better in front of the judges? But what I'm saying that since I'm not a psychologist, I don't know exactly what is moving him. What is important is that there will be factors in the surrounding which will come to him and say, hey, you can achieve A, B, C, D, including the enlargement of the Abraham Accord of more than 4 years ago, if you go for peace. And for him, I believe that the Abraham Accords are very, very important. And if he can enlarge it, maybe is a way to convince him to go for peace with the Palestinians. Because until recently, at least, he believed that he could make peace with all the Arab countries and without making peace with the Palestinians, and only then come to the Palestinians and say, now you have to do what I want you to do. That was stupid and wrong. And I hope that he understands it, because he is not stupid.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Yossi Beilin.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Well, let's get some more analysis now from the former special presidential envoy for the global coalition to ISIS and former deputy national security advisor, Ambassador James F. Jeffrey. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Ambassador Jeffrey. First of all, I'd just like to ask you for your reaction when you heard the news that Yahya Sinwar had been killed. What went through your mind?
First of all, how important that is. Nobody will regret his passing. He was a genius behind one of the most dramatic developments, certainly since 9/11 in the Middle East, which was the October 7th attack. And he has set into motion major changes in the region. I think on the whole, they'll turn out good, but they required his passing. This was critical both for the Israelis as a signal that they had achieved their key goals in Gaza, but also in terms of moving to a ceasefire, which is what President Biden is now pushing very hard for. Sinwar was a major obstacle. So for all of these reasons, I was particularly delighted, and I'm quite hopeful.
Yeah, indeed. President Biden called him an insurmountable obstacle, an obstacle that no longer exists. And he said there's much work to be done. Is your interpretation of the work that needs to be done specifically work oriented towards achieving a ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, first of all, you can't separate a ceasefire from Gaza from everything else. In a nutshell, we have been in a conflict for over 20 years, mainly one side in the conflict, Iran, developing these proxies over 5 Arab states, state capture, development of missiles, the nuclear program. We've pushed back, but not very effectively, ditto the Israelis and Arab states. But since the 7th of October, there's been a major counteroffensive, enthusiastically by Israel, unenthusiastically, but very effectively by the United States and other partners. And we're in a different situation where Iran has been knocked back on its heels for the first time in 20 years. So a Gaza ceasefire can further solidify this new Middle East. It can open the door to even closer relations between Arab states and Israel, particularly a Saudi-Israeli arrangement under the Abraham Accords. And it can further pressure Iran to rethink its entire Middle East program.
Just stay with us, Ambassador, because let's take a listen to what President Biden said when he received the news of the killing of Yahya Sinwar.
The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians and Germans and so many others on his hands. I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace, a better future in Gaza without Hamas.
Okay, that was President Biden speaking there, reacting to the news of the death of Yahya Sinwar. Ambassador Jeffrey, he talks about an opportunity. He talks about his conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Do you get the impression that there is will and desire on the part of Prime Minister Netanyahu for now some kind of discussion oriented towards achieving peace and brokering a ceasefire?
That's still an open question. I would refer you to Thomas Friedman's 2 last pieces in the New York Times, including one today where he raises that, and he knows Netanyahu well. I know Netanyahu not quite as well, but more recently. He certainly is capable of doing this at certain times, including before the 7th of October. In our talks with the Saudis, he indicated willingness to move forward on some kind of arrangement with the Palestinians as the price of diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. So he is capable of doing this. And the 3-step peace plan that President Biden announced at the end of May is actually an Israeli plan. And if whatever's left of Hamas agrees to a ceasefire, I'm pretty sure that the Israelis will go along with it, because at this point, the pressure to get the hostages back will be really insurmountable.
Yeah, I mean, what else is there? I mean, obviously the hostages are very much everyone's focus, and that was one of the first issues to be raised after the killing of Yahya Sinwar was confirmed yesterday. The hostage groups in Israel demanding that something be done, more be done to bring about the freedom of their loved ones. But what else do you think, just trying to see the world through Benjamin Netanyahu's prism, what else does Israel need to achieve in order to bring about an end to the violence in Gaza?
Yeah, the objective Bibi Netanyahu, which he's been for most of his career, would look at it this way. One, he's achieved about as much as he can militarily in Gaza. 23 of the 24 Hamas battalions have been defeated. It has almost no offensive capability, and its lifeline under and through the border to Egypt has been cut. So if he can get a ceasefire, and as part of that, because that's the package, get the hostages back, B, and C, open the door to some kind of international presence. The Emiratis have put a proposal on the table. There's reports, including from Friedman and others, that Ron Dermer from the Israeli side, Netanyahu's closest advisor, Blinken's people, and others are talking about this. I and others from the outside have proposed a plan that is very similar to the Emirati plan. Others are working on things like this. So that's the C of the ABC, which is a day after in Gaza that doesn't involve the Israelis. This is all feasible, but the devil is in the details. Hamas first has to agree to a ceasefire and the return of the hostages.
Yeah, Antony Blinken, U.S. Secretary of State, heading to Israel next week, heading to the region next week. We don't know exactly what's on his itinerary, but are you optimistic, given the backdrop and the difference in circumstances versus previous visits, and there have been more than a dozen visits during the last year, that actually Antony Blinken is going to return to Washington with something to show for it?
Well, the problem isn't Blinken's diplomatic skills. The problem is the wrong message. Blinken was carrying the message that characterized U.S. policy, and I was executing it in 3 administrations vis-a-vis Iran and its proxies since 20 years. And we continued after the 7th of October, including in Tony's visits, and the Israelis learned their lesson. And that message was, look, Iran and its surrogates aren't really a threat. They can be managed diplomatically. All you have to do is de-escalate, accept ceasefires, keep the region calm. It'll all be okay. I was on the phone with Rice when she passed that message on to the Israelis to stop the fighting in Lebanon in 2006. So Tony's been making this message, and the Israelis, I think correctly, have not been listening to him. Now it's a different message. It's going to be, okay, you have succeeded brilliantly in Gaza at great human cost, of course. You are doing very well with Hezbollah, and assuming that the next round of missile firings with Iran doesn't lead to a larger conflict, and I don't think it will, you've done well containing and deterring Iran. So it's time to move forward. Here is the peace plan. That's what that is a day after in Gaza, once there's a ceasefire in the Israeli military as part of that ceasefire, and that's an explicit part of it, Netanyahu has agreed to, withdraws. That's what Tony will be offering. That is something that the Israelis will at least listen to.
How optimistic, though, are you that they will act on that and not just listen to it?
Well, they will act on it only if Hamas accepts a ceasefire. If Hamas says we're not giving back the refugees, we're going to fight on forever, the Israelis, although I don't think that is the preference of most Israelis, and I don't think it's Netanyahu's preference, will stay in Gaza to continue to fight them. They have no choice. They can't abandon the place and leave whatever's left of the rubble in the hands of Hamas and the refugees there. In terms of accepting a day after, that involves what we and I think others are discussing, certainly the Emiratis, an international presence. Again, there's a lot of complications, particularly the role of the Palestinian Authority. And that would require a change in Netanyahu's position, but he's changed before. I think we're dealing with a different Middle East, a Middle East where Israel has brilliantly undermined what the New York Times reported a week ago was Sinwar's plan, coordinating with Hezbollah, Iran, and others, to launch a multi-front war against Israel. That whole concept, that whole threat that Israel has lived under for many years basically is gone.
Seen numerous administrations come and go in Washington. This is, of course, the final months of the Biden administration. And I'm just wondering whether perhaps during the final months of an administration, there is an opportunity, because that administration has nothing to lose and everything to gain in terms of its legacy, and in particular its foreign policy legacy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, it will depend to some degree on who wins in November. Because no administration, you're absolutely right, administrations are all about legacy at the very end, but no administration wants to see everything it does reversed. And while U.S. foreign policy tends to maintain, in the larger sense, the same deep characteristics, when presidents come in, particularly of another party, they tend to reverse whatever the last 6 things the last administration did, because they ran on these people were awful campaign. And this is characteristic of all, including Trump's campaign. So there is a risk of that. On the other hand, a new administration does not want problems. And the basic thrust of what Biden is trying to do is to expand on the Trump administration's Abraham Accords alliance of Israel, Arab states, and the United States against Iran. So it's not conceptually, it's not ideologically different from what Trump might want to do. And just obviously, Harris will want to do it.
Sure. And this is my last question. I mean, the election is just a matter of weeks away. Whose chances do you rate better, having worked for both administrations, Republican and Democrat, over the years, and being a specialist on this region? Who do you think has got the upper hand when it comes to delivering results in the Middle East, the Republicans or the Democrats?
I'm not going to be political. I'll give you the strengths and weaknesses of both. To understand both Gaza and everything that's happened the last year, and frankly, everything that's happened in the whole region, you have to look at the specific issues. In the case of Gaza, and a bit more broadly, it's Israel and the Palestinians, that struggle going back to 1948 and beyond. Then you have to look at the geostrategic big picture, which is Israel, Arab states, America, at times Turkey versus Iran and proxies. The Republicans are better at that latter. They're better at pushing back against Iran and proxies, particularly in the late Trump administration with the killing of Qasem Soleimani and certain other actions. The Democrats are better at the specifics, specifically finding a way forward between the Israelis and the Palestinians. But in either case, both are, the Democrats have learned a lesson that if you don't deal with Iran, Iran is going to deal with you. And the Republicans learned in the Trump administration, by explicit demand of the Emiratis, that you don't get Abraham's Accords progress between Israel and the Arab states, and thus the culmination of this plan, without concessions on the Palestinian issue by the Israelis. That was a demand the Emiratis made. The Israelis had to accept, and Washington went along with in the last administration. So I'm neither optimistic nor pessimistic about continuity. I think it is the most likely, but not absolutely certain, outcome of this election.
All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time to share that with us. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador James F. Jeffrey, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, let's get reaction now from people on the streets of Israel, Lebanon and Gaza to the news of Yahya Sinwar's death.
The leader, it's gone now, but this is not solve the problem. The problem now it's all the hostages that Hamas have in Gaza, and It's depend now in the Israeli government.
Yesterday, when the martyrdom of Sinwar was announced, it was a heavy blow to the Palestinian people. And Netanyahu was happy and will continue with the war rather than stop after Sinwar was targeted, allow the residents of northern and southern Gaza to return and end the war. No, he will continue.
This is a systematic plan. It's clear and obvious. When you come today and cut the head off a body, what are you doing? You're trying to eliminate the body by cutting off the head. But Israel doesn't know that if Sinwar is gone, there will be 1 million Sinwars. And if Haniyeh is gone, there will be 1 million Haniyehs. And if Hassan Nasrallah is martyred, we are all on his same path.
Well, for more on this, we can cross now to Florence in Italy and speak to the author and journalist Francesca Borri, who is a specialist on Middle Eastern affairs, who interviewed and spent time with Yahya Sinwar back in 2018, making for what was his first interview with a Western journalist. Francesca, thank you for speaking to us. Just tell us, how did you find out yesterday that Yahya Sinwar had been killed, and what went through your mind?
I expected it, actually. I was on the phone with one of the members of Hamas Politburo, and I got the picture that you have probably seen online, and I recognized immediately the watch. So before actually, Israel carried out the DNA test, the watch. Because it was not a common model among Palestinians, and the watch, because Yahya Sinwar always said, it was not to forget the value of time, and because he already wasted too much of his life in prison. And of course, when he said prison, he didn't mean only the actual, prison in Israel, 27 years, but also Gaza. And so immediately, I noticed the watch, and I was sure that was, Yahya Sinwar. And I expected it because, the real turning point of this war was the death of Nasrallah, honestly. It became clear, that no one was going to join the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, or someone else. And I think that was the moment when Yahya Sinwar went out of the tunnels and decided to die the way he wished to die. Because honestly, the last image, when he throws a stick at a drone without a hand in his last moments, that's an iconic image that won't be understood in the West. I think it will be misunderstood in the West. But it means that Hamas, as we know it, is over. But at the same time, Hamas as an idea is more powerful than ever. So that's exactly what he was looking for.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're saying what a lot of people have told us, which is that Israel has created some legendary status, a legendary legacy for Yahya Sinwar through his death.
Absolutely. And I text Khaled Meshal today, and I said, look, he was dead until yesterday, and now he's alive again. Because after the death of Hassan Nasrallah, Palestinians honestly were furious with Hamas and also furious with Sinwar, because, he really wanted to end the occupation. He really wanted to end the siege of Gaza. He was absolutely determined. And what he got? He ended Gaza, no? So when Nasrallah was killed, Palestinians were furious, especially because, no one in international media asked Palestinians, what do you think about, what's happening, International media, asked the opinion of Lebanese, of French, of Americans, of, Saudis, everybody, but not Palestinians, So the only achievement somehow of October 7th, Palestinians are against in the news. The Palestine question is again, a key issue of international politics. Not even that. So Palestinians were furious. And now, after yesterday, even, Hamas enemies, even Palestinians who have always been, against Hamas, have to say, look at the way he died. Look at the way, he has been fighting until his last breath.
Let's talk, Francesca, a bit more about the time you spent with Yahya Sinwar. I mean, first of all, how long did you spend with him? Where exactly did you hold your conversations with him? And how did he come across to you? Was he a charming person?
In Gaza, first of all the time in Gaza, several times. And at the time, he was not famous, no? So I had nothing with me, as a journalist. I couldn't really prepare myself. I had only a picture of Yahya Sinwar, a picture that I found online, I think in the Times of Israel. The usual picture of Sinwar is very aggressive, the typical picture of Western media and Israeli media. And so when he first entered the room, the first time, I was he was smiling and laughing, it was very funny, a funny man, and very average, always very, his main feature was not to have features, He was remarkable because he was unremarkable. And he told me, anyone in Gaza could be Yahya Sinwar, because he told me, you are Italian, you are European, no? So you can decide your life, no? You decide what you study, what you everything, no? But if you are Palestinian, and especially if you are a Palestinian from Gaza, your life decides who you are, who you will be. You are shaped by the events, you are shaped by the occupation and by Israel, And that's why I say, that's what I mean when I say it was average, It was a product, of the life he lived, basically. And if he could see me now, if he could watch me now, he would say, I'm sure, he would say, don't speak of me, speak of Gaza. Speak of Gaza, speak of the kids of Gaza. And my first image of Yahya Sinwar, honestly, the first that comes to my mind is not his image, but what was around him the first time I met him. These children on the beach, it's very typical of Gaza. Well, now the Gaza doesn't exist anymore. It was very typical of Gaza. These children, the children of Gaza, that you ask them, how old are you? And they said, oh, I'm 7 years old and 3 wars. And so they were sitting, on the beach, on the sand at sunset, and they just were watching, watching the sea, and they were wondering what life looks like across the sea, what the world looks like across the sea, And Yahya Sinwar told me, I just don't want my children, the children of Gaza, to live like this. And that's it, And then, what is the point, who is really responsible, for what is happening, Those who close the borders, or those who are trying, to break, basically, the barriers and to open the borders again. All his life, was to end the siege of Gaza.
It sounds like there was a really sort of philosophical element to his personality. Is that sort of how, am I correctly understanding you?
He was absolutely smart, absolutely. He knew what he wants, He listened to everybody. He also was always thinking a lot. And then when he took a decision, he just went straight. Absolutely, was absolutely smart. But once again, he really tried everything before October 7. He really tried everything. He was in a corner. And actually, when I got that interview, it was a totally different moment. Hamas was very weak. because there was still the siege, and Palestinians, of course, were furious with Israel, but were furious with Hamas also, with Fatah, with the PA, with everybody, with the world, of course, with the international community. But basically, they were blaming Hamas, which also we know, is not really a nice regime, with the internal freedoms and everything. And they were blaming Hamas for, basically, they were saying, okay, you are unable to break the siege, you keep firing these rockets and then we get a war. Because, October 7th, this is the 5th war of Gaza, not for sure, not the first one. And so it was very weak at the moment, He really tried everything. At that point, the title of my interview now, it really sounds like a different word. The title was, I don't want war anymore. And he was honest. He was not lying. For 1 year, there were negotiations with Hamas. He tried, to break the siege in that way. And nothing. The international community was looking away, Palestinians were totally forgotten. No one was really pressing Netanyahu. Netanyahu was absolutely strong. He was about, to sign the Abraham Accords. We didn't know that, and that's how Sinwar and Hamas changed. But definitely, he was always, studying the circumstances and adjusting, to the circumstances. Absolutely. I really don't understand why, Western media, and I'm a Western journalist, unfortunately, I don't understand why they keep, describing Sinwar like something like absolute evil, or, I don't know, a bloody what? The occupation is bloody. And it was absolutely rational.
Yes, but Francesca, to be fair, he did have blood on his hands. You clearly saw one aspect of his personality, but, the Israeli Prime Minister was very clear yesterday saying he had blood on his hands, and not just Israeli blood. He could be pretty ruthless, could he not, with the people of Gaza, especially if you crossed Yahya Sinwar. We're not talking about someone who was always perhaps as charming as he came across in front of a Western journalist.
No, absolutely. And I always say, when at the end, when my interview was over, so I was writing down everything, I was in front of my laptop, and then I received a newsletter, Amnesty International, so in the very moment I was taking the picture with him, a few meters away, like 300 meters away, in a square of Gaza, Hamas was basically executing publicly 6 let's say, traitors. Hamas was accusing them to be traitors, spy, whatever, 3 opponents, 3. I will never forget it, exactly in the same moment, But look, this is nothing new, And, even when we speak, of the Palestinians supporting Hamas, I think for the situation, Palestine is in with the last elections held, in 2006, also, when we say, okay, Hamas has been democratically elected, so is, legitimate, ruler of Gaza. Well, the elections were in 2006, so nobody is more, a legitimate ruler of Palestine under this point of view. The point is, for Palestinians, is always, and for the Middle East, I would say, a choice of the lesser evil,
Sure.
So what is the lesser evil? It is not by, if you see the polls, always, in the West Bank, Hamas is stronger than Fatah. Why? Because it's not in power. In Gaza, well, in the polls, Fatah is stronger than Hamas. Why? Because it's not in power. It's a way, to say that, it's the lesser evil. In that moment, Hamas was like, Hamas stands for, reaction. Really, that image of, throwing a stick at the drone, well, that's the symbol of Hamas.
Okay.
Hamas as an idea is that image.
All right. I'm so sorry to cut you short, Francesca. We're out of time. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, though, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Francesca Borri, thank you very much indeed. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you for watching. Be sure to join us again on Monday for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.